Right now, across Florida's wealthiest waterfront neighborhoods, house prices are crashing harder than most people realize. In Miami Beach, the average luxury property just dropped by $320,000 in a single year. Naples saw prices plunge 16.8%. And this isn't just affecting billionaires in their oceanfront estates. This is the beginning of something much bigger that's about to ripple through the entire Florida property market in ways that will determine whether you can afford to buy, whether you'll be forced to sell, and whether your Florida dream becomes your greatest asset or your biggest financial nightmare. Write in the comments, Florida Paradise Warning, if you're concerned about what's coming for property values. Because what's happening in Florida right now is exactly what happened before every major property correction in American history. The expensive areas crack first. Then the pressure spreads outward like a shockwave, reaching every corner of the state. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why this isn't just another market dip. This is the start of a genuine tank. But first, make sure to subscribe to USA Housing Truth, because we're bringing you the real story behind the Florida headlines that everyone else is too scared to tell you. All right, here's what nobody in the Florida property industry wants you to know. The Florida housing market just entered a phase that economists call capitulation. That's the moment when sellers who've been holding out for higher prices finally give up and accept devastating reality. When waterfront properties that were confidently listed at $2.5 million 10 months ago are now quietly reduced to $1.9 million. When real estate agents stop returning your calls about luxury viewings because they know the seller is about to pull the listing and slash the price again. We're watching the psychology of Florida's market completely reverse. And once that reversal starts, it feeds on itself in a way that's almost impossible to stop. Stay right here, because what I'm about to reveal next shows you exactly why Tom Brady and Jeff Bezos investing in Florida was the peak signal nobody recognized. Let's start with what's actually happening on the ground right now. The median Florida house price officially sits at $420,000 as of September 2025. That sounds relatively stable on the surface, but that statewide median is hiding something absolutely massive. South Florida and coastal waterfront prices dropped 3.1% year over year. That's the only major region in the entire state seeing annual declines. But it's not just any decline. This is happening while North Florida and Panhandle are still showing modest growth. Jacksonville is up 4.7%. Tallahassee is climbing steadily. But Miami, the place that's supposed to be the new financial capital, the paradise everyone was fleeing to, is actively falling. And here's the thing. When Miami falls, it doesn't happen because of local factors. It happens because something fundamental in Florida's economy has broken. Think about what Miami represents. It's where billionaires park wealth for tax advantages. It's where celebrities bought trophy properties. It's where hedge funds relocated entire headquarters. If wealthy buyers with unlimited cash and zero debt can't sustain prices in Miami Beach, what chance does the rest of Florida have when the economic pressure really starts to build? The cracks are already forming catastrophically. Transaction volumes are down 34% year over year in coastal South Florida. That means fewer people are actually buying. More desperate people are trying to sell. And the gap between supply and demand is widening every single month. When you've got sellers flooding the market and buyers pulling back in terror, there's only one direction prices can go: down hard. Don't you dare click away, because what comes next exposes the exact moment when Florida's luxury waterfront market entered freefall. Now here's where things get really serious. And this is the catalyst that's going to accelerate everything you're seeing. Tom Brady invested millions in Miami real estate at the peak. Jeff Bezos relocated to Florida specifically for tax benefits. Ken Griffin moved Citadel's entire headquarters from Chicago to Miami. These weren't just lifestyle moves. These were calculated financial decisions by some of the smartest wealth managers in America. But here's what they didn't account for. the insurance apocalypse that's making even billionaires reconsider Florida. Hurricane insurance that cost wealthy homeowners $15,000 annually in 2021 now costs $50,000, $60,000, sometimes $75,000 per year for waterfront luxury properties. That's over $6,000 every single month just for insurance. When Tom Brady looks at a $6 million Miami Beach property and realizes insurance alone costs $72,000 annually, even he has to question the math. And if billionaires are questioning Florida's math, what should regular people be thinking? But it gets exponentially worse. Florida's luxury property market faces additional crushing pressure from climate risk that wealthy buyers finally started pricing in. Sea level rise projections that were abstract concepts 3 years ago are now affecting property valuations directly. Waterfront properties that were considered safe investments are now seen as climate liabilities with 30-year timelines. Insurance companies aren't just raising rates, they're abandoning Florida coastal coverage entirely. When you can't get insurance at any price, your multi-million-dollar property becomes effectively worthless. Keep your eyes locked here, because what I'm about to expose next reveals how Naples became ground zero for Florida's luxury real estate collapse. According to luxury real estate data, the average high-end buyer in coastal Florida now faces an extra $112,000 in annual insurance and climate-related costs compared to 3 years ago. In waterfront communities like Miami Beach, Naples, and Palm Beach, that figure jumps to $170,000 annually. For buyers who are already writing million-dollar checks for down payments, an extra $170,000 in annual carrying costs is often the difference between buying and walking away permanently. And wealthy buyers have unlimited options. They can buy in California, Texas, the Caribbean, Europe, anywhere without Florida's unique insurance nightmare. The result? Luxury buyers are abandoning Florida in devastating numbers. Properties above $5 million saw sales drop 23% year over year. New luxury waterfront listings are down 16% because sellers know nobody's buying at these prices with these insurance costs. That's creating a catastrophic feedback loop. Luxury market freezes completely. Prices start dropping desperately to attract any buyers, but buyers are still terrified because they think prices might drop further and insurance might get worse, so they wait, which forces sellers to drop prices even more dramatically. This is textbook capitulation spiral, and once it starts in Florida's luxury market, it's incredibly hard to break. Now let's talk about the other force that's squeezing Florida homeowners and retirees right now: mortgage rates combined with insurance costs that make absolutely no sense. Between now and the end of 2027, roughly 1.8 million Florida homeowners are going to watch their fixed-rate mortgage deals expire. These are people who locked in rates at 2.6%, maybe 2.9%, back when the Federal Reserve was giving money away during pandemic. They bought their Florida properties thinking they could afford the monthly payments forever in paradise. And for the past few years, they were right. Life was comfortable in the sunshine. Payments were manageable. Everything seemed perfect. But now those deals are expiring, and they're staring at refinance rates of 6.25%, 6.75%, sometimes even 7%. Let me show you what that actually means in real Florida money combined with insurance devastation. If you borrowed $500,000 at 2.6%, your monthly mortgage payment sits around $2,000. Add insurance at $3,000 annually, and your total monthly cost was around $2,250. Manageable for most Florida households. You could budget for that. You could enjoy Florida lifestyle. But when that mortgage deal expires and you refinance at 6.5%, while insurance tripled to $9,000 annually, that same property suddenly costs you $3,750 a month. Stay with me, because what comes next shows you the impossible choice trap, forcing Florida retirees to panic sell their dream homes. That's an extra $1,500 every single month, over $18,000 a year in additional costs. For Florida retirees living on fixed Social Security and pension income already stretched thin, with healthcare costs astronomical and medication prices climbing, that extra $18,000 isn't just uncomfortable, it's genuinely impossible to afford. And if you think that sounds brutal, here's what makes it exponentially worse for Florida homeowners. If you don't refinance and you just let yourself fall onto your lender's standard variable rate, you could easily be looking at 8% or even 8.75%. At 8%, that $500,000 mortgage costs you $3,670 monthly before insurance. Add the $9,000 annual insurance, and you're at $4,420 total monthly. You're suddenly paying an extra $2,170 compared to your old comfortable deal. That works out to over $26,040 a year just in additional costs. Nothing else has changed. Same Florida Paradise home, same loan amount, same property. The only differences are interest rate and insurance apocalypse. For tens of thousands of Florida retirees, especially the ones who bought at the absolute peak in 2021 or 2022, when everyone was fleeing to Florida during pandemic, this is completely unsustainable and financially devastating. They stretched their retirement savings to afford the property when rates were low and insurance was reasonable. They told themselves, Florida real estate always appreciates and paradise is worth it. Now they're facing a choice that's destroying their retirement dreams. Find an extra $2,000 every month somehow from fixed income. Cut spending on everything, including healthcare and food. Live in financial terror in expensive Florida. Or sell their dream home before they're forced into foreclosure. And this is exactly why we're seeing inventory explode so catastrophically in coastal Florida communities. It's not that retirees suddenly decided they want to leave paradise. It's that they literally have no other financial option remaining. They cannot afford to stay in Florida anymore. Here's what makes this retirement crisis even more heartbreaking and should terrify younger buyers. There's a massive generational divide happening in Florida that nobody wants to discuss. Honestly, if you're over 70 years old in Florida, there's a 62% chance you bought your home decades ago, when prices were reasonable, and your property taxes are protected by Save Our Homes. No mortgage, minimal property tax increases, affordable insurance from years ago. You're sitting relatively comfortable. But if you're a recent retiree who moved to Florida in the last 5 years for the dream, you're almost certainly carrying a mortgage bought at peak prices, and you're the one feeling every single rate rise and insurance increase, like devastating blows destroying your retirement. Recent Florida retirees are holding massive mortgage debt at terrible timing, which means they're getting squeezed the hardest financially. While older Florida residents who bought decades ago sit on enormous equity they built when paradise was actually affordable. Don't go anywhere, because what I'm about to reveal next exposes why small Florida landlords are fleeing while Wall Street consolidates everything. This isn't about blaming anyone or pointing fingers at different generations of Florida residents. That's pointless and divisive. It's just the mathematical reality of when people bought Florida property and under what economic conditions. But what it does mean is that the pain of higher interest rates and insurance apocalypse is concentrated almost entirely on one specific group: recent Florida retirees and working families who believed the Florida dream in their 50s and 60s. And that group is now flooding the coastal market with desperate listings because they physically cannot afford to stay in their Florida paradise homes anymore. The properties hitting the market aren't coming from people who want to leave Florida. They're coming from people whose retirement dreams are being financially destroyed. Now, let's look at what's happening with Florida landlords and investors in more detail, because this is creating one of the most counterintuitive and terrifying market dynamics ever witnessed. Small Florida landlords and out-of-state investors, the ones with just 1 or 2 Florida rental properties, are exiting faster than anyone predicted possible. These tend to be investors who bought during pandemic thinking Florida was the future, or snowbirds who kept vacation properties. They're not professional, institutional investors. They don't have property management companies and insurance experts. They're just regular people who thought Florida rental income sounded great. And the new reality has made their investments absolute nightmares. Florida's insurance crisis, combined with maintenance costs on coastal properties, means landlords are losing money every single month. A property that was generating $800 monthly profit 3 years ago with reasonable insurance might now be costing the landlord $600 a month. After insurance tripled and mortgage rates doubled, insurance alone went from $4,000 annually to $12,000 or $15,000. That's an extra $8,000 to $11,000 in annual costs that rental income cannot possibly cover. They're literally paying thousands every month to keep tenants housed in Florida. That's not investment, that's financial disaster. And most small landlords cannot sustain it, so they're panic selling. And when these Florida properties hit the market, they're sometimes snapped up by retirees and families looking for primary residences who were previously renting. In a strange way, the investor exodus is actually creating opportunities for regular people to buy Florida property at depressed prices. Former rental properties now make up a huge chunk of coastal Florida listings. In some communities, it's 1 in every 3 properties desperately for sale. These tend to be well-maintained properties because landlords wanted good tenants. And they're being sold at prices 20 to 30% below peak because investors are motivated sellers who just want to escape their Florida nightmare. Keep watching because what comes next reveals the shocking truth about Wall Street buying Florida as individuals flee in panic. But here's the fascinating and terrifying contradiction that should alarm everyone. While small Florida landlords and individual investors are fleeing the coastal market in absolute panic, large institutional investors and Wall Street-backed companies are actually expanding operations aggressively in select Florida markets. Investment property purchases by institutions in Florida surged 24% in early 2025 in specific inland and North Florida markets. Yes, you heard that correctly and should be concerned. While nearly half of all small landlords are planning their complete exit from Florida, a smaller group of massive professional institutional investors is actively coming in and consolidating Florida real estate at depression prices. These aren't mom-and-pop landlords. These are Blackstone, Invitation Homes, institutional giants with billions in capital. They've planned for rate rises, built massive insurance reserves, and see the current coastal chaos as once-in-a-generation opportunity to dominate Florida real estate forever. They're buying properties from panicked small investors at 30 to 40% discounts from peak. They're avoiding coastal insurance nightmares and targeting inland regions where insurance is manageable and rental yields still make mathematical sense. And they're positioning themselves to control Florida's rental market completely once dust settles and small operators are totally eliminated. North Florida and Orlando suburbs are where institutional money is flowing like a flood. You can still buy a decent 3-bedroom house in Jacksonville suburbs for $320,000 that'll rent for $2,000 monthly. That's a yield of 7.5% before costs. Even after maintenance, insurance, vacancy periods, and everything else, institutional investors with scale are seeing solid returns. Compare that to Miami Beach, where you might pay $3 million for a condo that rents for $10,000 monthly, but insurance costs $6,000 monthly. That's negative cash flow nightmare that only gets worse. The numbers in coastal Florida are completely broken for any investor, unless you bought decades ago with no mortgage and grandfathered insurance. But inland, in North Florida, and in carefully selected Central Florida suburbs away from water, there are still genuine institutional scale deals if you have billions and can be ruthlessly professional about cherry-picking locations. Now here's what absolutely nobody is discussing properly and should terrify every Florida resident. Transaction volumes being down 34% doesn't just mean fewer people are buying. It means the Florida coastal market has essentially frozen solid in terror. People are completely paralyzed by fear and uncertainty about insurance and climate. Buyers don't want to commit because they're worried Florida prices will keep falling, and insurance will keep rising, and they'll end up catastrophically overpaying. Sellers don't want to slash their asking prices because they still remember what their neighbor's waterfront house sold for back in 2021 at the peak. So everyone's just waiting desperately for someone else to blink first. And basically nothing's happening in luxury coastal Florida. Stay locked in, because what I'm about to share next reveals the market freeze data that proves Florida's luxury collapse is accelerating. This creates a really strange situation where Florida market data actually looks relatively stable on the surface, because there aren't enough transactions to move the statewide averages very much. But underneath, there's massive tension building, like a spring being compressed tighter and tighter until catastrophic release. Eventually, something's going to give explosively. Let me show you. What I mean with some real Florida luxury examples that should alarm everyone. Zillow and Realtor data reported that the average new seller asking price in Miami Beach luxury dropped 3.2% in November 2025. That's a decrease of $96,000, bringing the luxury median to $2.9 million. That's the steepest November luxury decline in over a decade. More than 42% of listed coastal luxury homes have had at least one asking price reduction. The average cut is 9.4%. That's the highest level since February 2024 when panic first started. Florida luxury sellers are getting absolutely desperate. They're cutting prices repeatedly and dramatically, adding furniture and vehicles, offering to pay all closing costs and first-year insurance, anything to get any buyers through the door. But wealthy buyers aren't biting because they can see prices are still falling monthly and insurance is still rising. And here's what makes this even more devastating for all Florida property owners. The Florida market is splitting based on price points in catastrophic ways that will cascade downward. Sales agreed for homes priced above $3 million have fallen 26% year over year. New luxury listings in that category are down 19%. Wealthy buyers in these segments are watching and waiting in terror. They're spooked by insurance apocalypse, climate projections, wealthy residents quietly leaving Florida, celebrities liquidating. They're worried about absolutely everything, so they're not moving at all. But the sub-$500,000 segment, which accounts for about 72% of Florida's market, has been more resilient so far. Sales agreed are down only 7%. This is where first-time buyers and retirees are still transacting because they need somewhere to live in Florida, and they're finding opportunities from desperate coastal sellers exiting. So what does this all mean for the next 12 to 24 months in Florida? Let's be brutally direct about what's coming and will devastate property values. Prices in coastal South Florida and waterfront communities are going to continue falling relentlessly and accelerating downward. We're not talking about a crash where properties lose 50 or 60% of their value overnight. That's not how Florida real estate works with homestead protections. But we are looking at consistent monthly declines of 0.8 to 1.5%. That compound over time into catastrophic losses. A $2 million Miami Beach property losing 1% a month doesn't sound dramatic initially. But over 12 months, that's $240,000 in lost value. Over 24 months, that could be $450,000 to $500,000, depending on how sentiment shifts and insurance worsens. Don't click away, because what comes next gives you the exact timeline predictions for Florida's continued tank. The mortgage and insurance crisis is going to intensify dramatically and devastatingly through 2026 and 2027 as more fixed-rate deals expire. Every month, tens of thousands more Florida homeowners and retirees are going to face that brutal, impossible choice between paying significantly higher rates, plus tripled insurance, or selling their paradise dream. Many will try desperately to tough it out at first. They'll cut spending everywhere else, skip medications, stop seeing family, defer all maintenance, and pray. But eventually, if rates stay elevated and insurance keeps rising and Florida keeps getting more expensive, more will be forced to sell at any price. And every forced retiree sale adds more desperate supply to a Florida market that's already catastrophically oversupplied, which puts more downward pressure on all prices. Insurance crisis and climate risk are going to suppress Florida coastal transaction volumes for at least the next 2 to 3 years minimum. The insurance apocalypse effectively made coastal buying more expensive and riskier overnight for absolutely everyone, regardless of wealth. Luxury buyers are paying hundreds of thousands more annually in insurance. Regular buyers face insurance they cannot afford at any income level. Investors face impossible economics that guarantee losses. When buying becomes more expensive and riskier, and prices are falling, and insurance is rising, and climate projections worsen, rational, wealthy buyers delay indefinitely. They wait for better deals. They wait for lower prices. They wait for insurance stability that may never come. This waiting game keeps volume suppressed, and suppressed volumes mean prices stay soft and falling. Here's what's critical to understand about Florida's unique situation. Tallahassee politicians are terrified of a Florida property crash, but they're completely trapped and helpless. Property wealth and property taxes underpin enormous portions of Florida's state budget and local government funding. If property values fall sharply, it threatens the entire state financial system and government operations. But they also cannot force insurance companies to stay or lower rates. That's why they created Citizens Property Insurance as insurer of last resort. But it's overwhelmed and rates are still astronomical. They're walking an impossible tightrope. Keep insurance rates high and watch property values crater. Force rates down and watch more carriers flee entirely, leaving nobody to insure anything. There's absolutely no good option or solution. So what actually happens to Florida real estate? My prediction based on everything we're witnessing is this. Coastal South Florida and waterfront communities will see cumulative price declines of 15 to 23% from peak to trough. That trough probably hits sometime in mid-2027 after multiple hurricane seasons worsen insurance further. North Florida and inland communities will stay relatively stable or see only modest declines in the 5 to 8% range in affordable pockets away from water. Transaction volumes in coastal luxury stay suppressed and frozen until insurance crisis resolves somehow. Probably not until late 2027 at the earliest, if ever. Forced sales from refinancing retirees and homeowners peak in 2026 and 2027, adding continuous brutal supply pressure to coastal markets. First-time buyers and retirees in affordable inland regions find genuine opportunities, especially from investor panic sales. But buyers in coastal waterfront Florida remain largely priced out or terrified, despite falling prices, because insurance makes total cost absolutely prohibitive. Institutional investors consolidate massive Florida inland market share, buying from desperate small sellers at Depression-era prices. Stay with me, because what comes next tells you exactly what you need to do right now, based on your specific Florida situation. Now, what should you actually do with this critical information? It depends entirely on where you sit in Florida's collapsing coastal market. If you're a Florida homeowner in inland areas, with manageable insurance and comfortable mortgage and no plans to move, you can probably ride this out. Your property value might dip moderately, but over the very long term, you'll likely be fine. If you're a coastal homeowner coming off a fixed-rate deal soon, talk to mortgage broker and insurance agent right now. Today, not next month. Understand exactly what Florida rates and insurance you'll face, and whether you can truly afford the combined devastation if the numbers genuinely don't work. It might be better to sell immediately while you still have equity, rather than waiting until you're forced to sell from total financial destruction. If you're renting in Florida and thinking about buying, do the absolutely brutal math for your specific situation, including insurance reality. Don't buy because you feel like you should, or because Florida is paradise. Buy because the numbers make sense for your plans over the next 7 to 10 years minimum, and you can afford insurance long term. In some inland regions, buying now makes complete sense. In coastal waterfront areas, waiting or never buying might be dramatically smarter. If you're an investor with serious capital, pay very close attention to location. This is the kind of market where generational wealth gets made or destroyed by people who can see value where others see catastrophic risk. But you need to be institutional-level professional about it and avoid coastal insurance nightmares entirely. Conservative numbers, strong cash flow, properties in locations far from water, with genuine demand, fundamentals, and manageable insurance. Don't chase yield in coastal regions with climate risk and insurance disasters. And if you're a Florida landlord or investor, make an honest decision about whether you're in this long term or just desperately hanging on. If you cannot make the numbers work at 6.5% mortgage rates with Florida's insurance apocalypse, selling might honestly be the right move to preserve capital. But if you have solid properties in strong inland locations, with genuine cash flow that can weather this storm, and reasonable insurance, riding out this difficult period could position you incredibly well when small operators are completely eliminated. Here's the bottom line that every Florida resident needs to understand. Florida's coastal property market isn't crashing in a dramatic overnight collapse, but it is tanking slowly and steadily in luxury waterfront regions. The combination of insurance apocalypse, wealthy residents reconsidering Florida, higher mortgage rates, climate risk reality, and psychological shift from greed to absolute fear is creating a perfect storm that cannot be stopped. Miami Beach and Naples. Luxury neighborhoods are cracking. First, just like they always do, before major Florida corrections. Tom Brady and Jeff Bezos investing at the peak was the warning sign. Ken Griffin moving Citadel was the top. The pressure is spreading inland, and over the next 2 years, we're going to see Florida property ownership reshape itself in fundamental ways. The people who understand what's happening, who can read the insurance and climate signals correctly, and who make decisions based on math, rather than emotion or Florida paradise mythology, those are the people who will come out ahead. Whether that means buying in the right inland location at the right time, selling coastal property before you're forced to, or simply holding steady in safe areas and ignoring the coastal chaos. The key is understanding the reality of Florida's insurance and climate situation, rather than the propaganda from real estate agents and politicians who desperately need you to keep believing Florida paradise real estate only goes up. If this breakdown helped you see what's actually happening behind the Florida Paradise headlines, make sure you're subscribed to USA Housing Truth so you don't miss our next deep dive. Hit that like button if this opened your eyes to Florida's coastal real estate tank. Comment below with Florida Tank if you're watching Luxury Waterfront Collapse. Subscribe and turn on notifications for updates as this insurance and climate crisis develops. Share this with at least 3 people who own or are considering buying in Florida, because they desperately need to know what's coming. Because what happens over the next 2 years in Florida is going to determine who protects their wealth and who gets completely destroyed financially by insurance and climate reality.